A young wheelchair user is humiliated at an event for being from a poor family. When they discover who his grandmother is, everyone is shocked. In a world of luxury and power, a young man battles against scorn and humiliation as he tries to find his place in an environment that does not accept him. A grand banquet, a night filled with whispers and furtive glances, and an unexpected revelation that will change everything. Witness the transformation of someone who refuses to be defined by appearances and discover the impact that a single night can have on lives that were destined to cross paths. Prepare yourself for a story where dignity, strength, and justice intertwine, challenging everything you believe about power and status. The golden lights gleamed off the silverware as the grand hall filled with laughter and lively murmurs. The luxurious banquet was in full swing, with guests dressed in dazzling attire savoring delicacies prepared by the city's top chefs. The event, organized by Nathaniel and Evelyn Carter, had become one of the most anticipated of the year, drawing influential figures from the local elite. Amidst that splendor, one figure stood out for his simplicity. Liam, a young man of only 18 years, moved slowly in his wheelchair, accompanied by his father, Michael. Michael's understated elegance contrasted with the furtive and often disdainful glances they received. They did not belong to that world of excess and ostentation. Liam knew this from the moment they crossed the imposing doors of the hall, but his father's insistence on attending the event had been unyielding. "We need to keep up appearances, Liam. It's important for our future," Michael had said earlier, trying to sound convincing. But Liam knew that what really drove him was a desire to prove they were more than just a poor family from humble origins. Michael believed he could build a better future for them, and this event seemed like the first step in that direction. As they entered the hall, the opulence around them felt suffocating to Liam. Every chandelier, every piece of luxurious decoration, was a reminder of how far they were from that world. Although young, Liam was perceptive. He had grown up watching his father struggle to support the family after the death of his mother, a loss that had left deep scars on both of them. Michael, a man of few words, always believed that one day, with enough effort, he would be able to give Liam a better life, far from the hardships they had faced. But Liam began to question whether this relentless pursuit of acceptance was worth it. As they entered the hall, the looks of disdain became almost palpable. It wasn't just Liam's physical condition that drew attention, but the way his clothes, though clean and well-ironed, were clearly from a different reality. A reality far removed from the silk ties and ball gowns that paraded around him. Liam, who had never cared about such things, felt the weight of the environment more intensely than he had ever imagined. Soon, he noticed that he was being watched by a group of young people in the corner of the hall. Among them, a boy with arrogant features seemed to lead the laughter. Lucas, the host's son, had a reputation known for his arrogance and veiled cruelty. With his friends around him, he didn't hesitate to make comments about Liam. "Who would have thought that this kind of people gets invited now? They must have won some charity raffle," Lucas mocked, drawing approving laughter. Liam pretended not to hear, but the words cut deep. He knew that this humiliation was just the beginning of a night that promised to be long and painful. He tried to focus on something positive, to remember why he was there. Michael believed in a better future, but Liam began to question whether all this sacrifice was worth it. As the banquet continued, Michael noticed that Liam was uncomfortable and approached him. "Is everything okay, son?" he asked, concerned. Liam just nodded, trying to hide the pain he felt. But Michael knew his son was not well, and it filled him with a silent sadness. He just wanted to give Liam a better life, but now, in the face of that subtle and constant humiliation, he began to question his own decisions. Liam remembered the nights when his father, after long days of work, still found time to sit by his bed and tell stories. Stories of overcoming, of people who, against all odds, managed to succeed. It had been an attempt by Michael to inspire his son, to show that despite the difficulties, there was hope. But in that hall, surrounded by people who looked at him as if he were invisible, Liam couldn't find that same hope. The night was just beginning, and Liam knew that many other humiliations awaited him. But what he didn't know was that this night, which had begun with disdain and crooked looks, would end with a revelation that would change everything. A revelation that no one there could have predicted, and that would shake the very foundations of that luxurious banquet. The sound of cutlery clinking against fine plates and the muffled laughter of side conversations echoed in the grand hall. The golden lights, though magnificent, began to weigh on Liam's eyes, as if they were spotlights pointing directly at him, exposing him to the veiled cruelty that hung in the air. Sitting in his wheelchair, he tried to find something to hold on to, something that would help him endure the oppressive atmosphere surrounding him. But all he felt was disdain. Michael, in his desperate attempt to make connections, drifted further away from his son, moving from group to group, distributing forced smiles and empty greetings. Liam knew his father was trying, but it all seemed like a futile effort. That elite was not interested in them. They were just two more faces that didn't fit into the perfect tapestry of that luxurious banquet. Lucas, the arrogant young man, noticed Liam's vulnerability. He was the kind of person who fed off others' weaknesses, and seeing someone like Liam, with his evident physical condition and disconcerting simplicity, was like a gift to him. Alongside his friends, who laughed at every malicious joke that came out of his mouth, Lucas approached Liam, ready to make that moment his personal stage of humiliation. "Hey man," Lucas began, his voice dripping with irony. "Don't you think you're a bit out of place here? I mean, just look at all this. It's not exactly your environment, is it?" He gave a smile, the kind of smile that didn't hide the venom behind every word. Liam stared at Lucas, trying to stay calm, but the words hit like silent blows. He had faced difficult situations before, but there, in the middle of that banquet, surrounded by people who didn't see him as an equal, the pain was sharper. He felt his hands trembling slightly on the wheels of the chair, but he forced himself to keep staring at Lucas, even though it hurt. Before Liam could respond, Michael, who had noticed Lucas's approach, quickly came to his son's side. "Excuse me, young man, don't you have more important things to discuss?" Michael said, in a tone that tried to be firm but also carried a hint of supplication. Lucas just laughed without backing down. "Sure, sir. We're just trying to get to know your son better. He seems to be an interesting figure." Michael pressed his lips together, feeling the humiliation coursing through his veins. He knew Liam shouldn't be going through that, but there, among people he so wanted to impress, his words seemed to carry little weight. The anguish of seeing his son being despised and ridiculed before his eyes gnawed at him from within. He felt a helpless anger growing in his chest, but he didn't know how to act without making things worse. As Lucas and his friends walked away, laughing among themselves, Michael knelt beside Liam. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't know it would be like this," he said, his voice laden with guilt. Liam shook his head, unable to look directly at his father. "It's okay, Dad. I expected this." But the words, though reassuring, didn't dispel the sadness he felt. It was clear to both of them that the night wouldn't bring the opportunities Michael had imagined. As the night progressed, the feeling of exclusion only grew. Liam realized that no matter how hard he tried, he would always be seen as inferior, not just because of his physical condition but also because of the simplicity his family represented. This wasn't a night of inclusion or new opportunities. It was a night where the less fortunate were reminded of their place in the social hierarchy. Liam tried to focus on something to distract him from the oppressive atmosphere. He looked around, trying to find some beauty in the hall's exuberant decor, but all he saw was superficiality and excess. Lucas's words still echoed in his mind, like thorns digging deeper and deeper. He knew that to those people he was an intruder, someone who didn't belong there. And with each passing second, that feeling only intensified. As the clock advanced and the night deepened, Liam mentally prepared for another round of humiliations. He knew that Lucas and his friends weren't finished with him. But what Liam didn't know was that the night was about to take an unexpected turn. A turn that would forever change the way he saw himself and how the world around him saw him. The hours dragged on with the slowness of a nightmare. The banquet, which was supposed to be a celebration of luxury and power, had become for Liam a golden prison, where every second seemed to increase the weight on his shoulders. The humiliation he had already suffered was far from over. It was as if the hall was impregnated with an invisible malice, spread by glances and whispers that, although discreet, struck Liam like an incessant current. Michael, in a vain attempt to maintain some dignity, distanced himself a bit from Liam to talk to some of the guests who seemed more receptive. But it was obvious that he was being tolerated, not accepted. The distance he kept from Liam was an attempt to protect him, but deep down, Liam knew that his father felt powerless, perhaps even ashamed for not being able to do more. Lucas, the instigator of all that discomfort, seemed to be lurking, ready to strike again. He and his group of friends, who fed off others' discomfort, stalked Liam, waiting for the right moment to deliver another cruel blow. And that moment came sooner than Liam expected. When everyone gathered around the main table for a toast, Lucas approached again, bringing with him a malicious smile that Liam had already learned to fear. The crowd was excited, crystal glasses raised in celebration, but for Liam, the environment was becoming increasingly oppressive. He felt the heat rise up his spine as if something inside him was about to explode. Lucas, holding a glass of champagne, wasted no time. "So, Liam, what do you think of all this? This is quite different from where you come from. Huh? I bet you've never seen so much wealth in one place," he said, with a voice laden with irony. The tone was low enough that only Liam could hear, but the words burned. Liam kept his eyes fixed on Lucas, without responding. He knew that anything he said would only be another reason for ridicule. He felt trapped in a circle of disdain from which he couldn't escape. Lucas, realizing that he wouldn't get a reaction, decided to go further. "You know, these parties are for people who really belong to this world. That's not your case," Lucas continued, now with a cruel gleam in his eyes. "Maybe it's better if you and your dad leave. You're just getting in the way." The words were dripping with venom, and the intention behind them was clear. Liam, who had until then managed to maintain a fragile control over his emotions, felt something break inside him. The pain, the disdain, the humiliation. It all accumulated into a rage that he could no longer contain. His hands trembled, and before he could think, he responded, "You don't know anything about me or my family. We are as worthy of being here as any of you." The response, though firm, sounded weak amid the grandeur of the hall. Lucas, however, seemed to have been waiting for just that. He laughed, loud enough for others around to hear. "Worthy? And what do you know about dignity? Look at you. You're just a symbol of pity," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Lucas's final comment echoed like a final blow, a humiliation that Liam could no longer bear. He felt his eyes fill with tears, but he refused to let them fall. Not in front of Lucas, not in front of everyone. But the damage was done. Around him, the whispers grew louder. People began to look at Liam with a mix of pity and disdain. The hall, which had already been a place of discomfort, now became unbearable. Michael, who was close enough to hear the last exchange of words, quickly returned to Liam's side. "Let's leave, Liam," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. But there was a noticeable tremor, a mix of anger and desperation. He knew he couldn't protect his son from that kind of cruelty. "These people, they're not important," he tried to console, but the wound was already open. As Michael tried to guide Liam out of the hall, a clear and firm voice echoed through the room, immediately silencing all conversations and laughter. "And who do you think you are to judge the dignity of others?" The voice was female, laden with an authority that made everyone turn toward the entrance of the hall. There, standing, with a presence that made the very air vibrate, was an elderly woman, dressed in sober but imposing elegance. Her white hair was impeccably arranged, and her eyes, though aged, shone with a determination that few possessed. The hall, once filled with sounds and whispers, plunged into a sepulchral silence. Liam, still processing what had just happened, looked at the figure at the entrance of the hall and felt his heart race. That woman, he recognized her, but he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. The silence that gripped the hall was almost palpable. Every person present seemed to hold their breath, caught in the tension of the moment, not knowing exactly what to expect. The presence of that elderly woman, proud and imposing, cast a shadow over everyone, a shadow that carried with it a weight that no one could ignore. Michael stood frozen beside Liam, his eyes fixed on the figure at the entrance. He knew that woman, but like his son, he couldn't believe she was actually there. The blood in his veins seemed to have turned to ice, and the sense of helplessness that had tormented him all night turned into something different. A mix of relief and apprehension. Liam, for his part, felt his chest tighten as memories raced through his mind. He knew exactly who that woman was, but the context, the place, the situation, nothing made sense. But at the same time, everything began to fall into place. Mrs. Margaret? The voice of Nathaniel Carter, the event's host, broke the silence, but it sounded insecure, almost trembling. He and his wife, Evelyn, stood at the back of the hall, their faces tinged with a surprise that bordered on despair. It was as if they had been caught in the act, and in a sense they had been. Margaret Davis, or Mrs. Margaret as she was widely known, was a figure that needed no introduction. A respected philanthropist, with a legacy built on acts of charity and an enviable financial empire, she was a woman of unquestionable power. But it wasn't her name or her fortune that made the hearts of those present race at that moment. It was the fact that she was there in that hall and with a very specific reason. Margaret began to walk slowly through the hall, her firm steps reverberating on the marble floor, each movement of hers like a hammer striking the exposed nerves of the guests. No one dared to move, much less speak. All eyes were fixed on her as she advanced toward the center of the hall, where Liam and Michael remained motionless. Lucas, who moments before had displayed untouchable arrogance, now seemed smaller, as if all his power had been sucked out by the presence of the elderly woman. The smug smile had disappeared from his face, replaced by an expression of doubt, mixed with growing fear. When Margaret finally stopped in front of Liam and Michael, her firm eyes fixed on Liam, who stared back with a mix of confusion and a spark of hope. She slowly bent down until her eyes were level with Liam's. An absolute silence reigned in the hall as everyone awaited the unfolding of what seemed to be a crucial moment, though no one could predict the depth of what was to come. Liam, Margaret began, her voice firm but full of tenderness. You are my grandson, and I am here to remind everyone that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to treat you as less than what you are. Those words, so simple and direct, fell like thunder on everyone there. The revelation made the air vibrate, as if an immense weight had been placed on the shoulders of those around. Liam, still processing what he had just heard, felt a wave of shock and emotion course through his body. His grandmother, that powerful and respected woman, was there, in front of him, claiming him in a way that no one else had dared to do. The whispers began to spread through the hall like wildfire. Everyone knew who Margaret Davis was, but no one, absolutely no one, had any idea that Liam was her grandson. It was as if a curtain had been lifted, revealing a truth that no one had ever considered. The young man who, until minutes before, had been the target of humiliation and disdain, was now under the protection of one of the most influential women in the country. Nathaniel and Evelyn Carter, who had remained silent until then, began to move nervously, trying to control a situation that was clearly out of their hands. Mrs. Margaret, we didn't know he was your grandson, Nathaniel stammered, the insecurity evident in his voice. Margaret stood up, turning to face Nathaniel and Evelyn with a coldness that made them both involuntarily step back. And does that justify the treatment he received? The fact that you didn't know who he was makes any difference in how you decided to treat him. The question hung in the air, laden with a gravity that no one could ignore. Evelyn tried to intervene, her voice trembling with fear and anxiety. It was a terrible mistake. Please, believe me, we didn't intend to. Intention or not, Margaret interrupted, her voice as sharp as a blade. You humiliated my grandson, and that's not something that can simply be forgotten. What you call a mistake is, in fact, a clear demonstration of who you really are. The silence returned, now laden with the weight of accusation. Liam, who had remained silent until then, felt a new strength within him. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind, dissipating the despair that had once dominated him. He, who had always felt insignificant, now saw his condition in a new light. It wasn't he who should feel ashamed or hide. The shame belonged to those who had used their power and privilege to diminish others. The hall was paralyzed. The luxurious banquet, which had begun as a celebration of power and ostentation, had now become a battlefield where truth and justice fought to emerge. Margaret's revelation had changed everything, and no one would leave there the same as they had entered. Margaret, realizing that she had everyone's attention, continued, I didn't come here to talk about business or to make new friends. I came here to defend the dignity of someone who was despised by you without any reason other than prejudice. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something I will not tolerate. The impact of her words was undeniable. Every sentence struck those present like a hammer blow, dismantling the false sense of superiority that many had carried with them throughout the night. Margaret's figure, imposing and resolute, seemed to grow with every word, while the others shrank under the weight of their own actions. The hall, which had once been the stage for laughter and lively conversations, was now shrouded in an almost sepulchral silence. Margaret's words still echoed in everyone's ears, leaving a trail of tension in the air. No one dared to move a muscle, as if even the simple act of breathing could shatter the fragile balance that kept the situation under control. Liam, who had previously felt small and crushed by the weight of scorn and humiliation, was now experiencing something completely new. It was as if his grandmother's presence had dispelled the dark clouds that suffocated him, revealing a clear sky full of possibilities. He looked at Margaret, still in shock, but with a new understanding beginning to form within him. That woman, his grandmother, was not just a powerful figure in the world of business and philanthropy. She was his family, and she was there to defend him, to give him the value he had always deserved, but that few had recognized. Michael, who had watched everything with a mix of amazement and gratitude, felt a wave of emotions take over him. He knew of his mother's power, Margaret, but had distanced himself from her years ago, preferring to build his own life, far from the oppressive shadow of the empire she commanded. However, seeing now the strength with which she stood up in defense of Liam, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and relief. Perhaps he thought it was a mistake to keep Liam away from this part of his history. Margaret, sensing the confusion and conflicting emotions on Liam's face, moved even closer. With a caring gesture, she placed her hand on her grandson's shoulder, her eyes conveying a tenderness that contrasted with the firmness she had shown moments before. Liam, you have more strength than you imagine. Don't let others' scorn erase who you are. His grandmother's words resonated deeply within Liam. He felt a wave of warmth and strength flood his chest. For so long, he had only seen himself through the eyes of others, as someone different, worthy of pity or disdain because of his physical condition and his humble origins. But now, for the first time, he was beginning to see himself through different eyes. Margaret's strength, the dignity she exuded, all of it seemed to be transferred to him, as if she were sharing a piece of her own essence. Nathaniel and Evelyn, the event's hosts, were visibly disconcerted. The revelation that Liam was Margaret Davis's grandson had caught them completely off guard. And now, they found themselves in a delicate position, desperately trying to control the damage. Evelyn, realizing the gravity of the situation, took a step forward, her expression laden with regret. "Mrs. Margaret, I would like to deeply apologize. This was a terrible mistake, and I assure you it wasn't our intention." Margaret didn't allow her to finish. Her voice, though calm, cut through the air like a blade. "Apologies, Evelyn? Apologies don't erase what you did. What I saw here today was a reflection of a deeply rooted culture of scorn and superiority. You didn't just attack my grandson. You attacked everything I have always stood for." Margaret's words reverberated through the hall, each syllable laden with meaning. It wasn't just a reprimand. It was a direct accusation against the entire value system that supported that kind of event, where status and wealth seemed to define a person's worth. Evelyn's face turned pale, and Nathaniel, beside her, seemed unable to find an adequate response. Liam, now strengthened by his grandmother's presence, felt the need to say something. He, who had remained silent until then, gathered his courage and spoke, his voice coming out slightly trembling but firm. "You don't know anything about me, about what I've been through, about what my family has been through. I don't need anyone's pity, and I definitely don't need the scorn of people who think they're superior just because they have more money or because they can walk." The hall once again fell into a deep silence. Liam's words, though simple, carried an undeniable truth. It was the truth of someone who had been scorned and underestimated, but who now, in front of everyone, was claiming his worth. Margaret looked at her grandson with silent pride, seeing in him the spark of courage she had always known existed, but that was now beginning to shine brighter. "Liam is right," said Margaret, turning again to the hosts. "All of you here need to reflect on what it means to be human. It's not money or status that defines a person. It's character, dignity, and how we treat others, especially the most vulnerable." As Margaret's words echoed through the hall, an evident discomfort spread among the guests. Each of them felt the weight of the accusations, realizing that the night, which had begun as a display of power and wealth, had now become a mirror reflecting their own flaws and hypocrisies. Nathaniel, realizing that there was no way to escape the truth, lowered his head, defeated. "You're right, Margaret. We failed as hosts and, more importantly, as human beings. There's no excuse for what happened here." Liam, feeling the tension in the air, realized that the change that had occurred was not just within him. What Margaret had done, what he himself had said, was transforming everyone there. The humiliation and scorn he had felt were slowly dissipating, giving way to something more, a sense of justice and transformation. As the guests began to murmur among themselves, realizing the seriousness of what had happened, Margaret turned again to Liam. "The night doesn't end here, my grandson. There's much more ahead, and I will be by your side, always." Liam felt a solitary tear escape from his eyes, but this time, it wasn't from sadness or pain. It was from relief, gratitude, and a deep understanding that, finally, he had found his place. With his grandmother by his side, he knew that he was no longer alone and that together, they could face any challenge that lay ahead. The tension in the hall still hung in the air, dense and laden with unspoken meanings. Margaret, standing tall beside Liam, seemed like a statue of unshakable determination. Every look, every gesture of hers, was a silent lesson in strength and dignity, something those guests would never forget. Nathaniel and Evelyn, desolate, realized that the humiliation they had inflicted on Liam was turning against them in an implacable way. There were no more excuses, only the raw reality of the consequences of their actions. Michael, now beside his mother and son, felt an internal shift. Throughout his life, he had tried to distance himself from Margaret's power and influence, believing that he could build something on his own, far from the shadows that had pursued him during his youth. But in that moment, seeing the grandmother and grandson side by side. He understood that the strength that came from his family was not something to be avoided, but rather embraced. It wasn't just about power or money, but about the legacy that Margaret had built, a legacy of justice, dignity, and compassion. The event, once a symbol of ostentation, had become a moral lesson. The guests, now uncomfortable and deeply reflective, began to murmur among themselves, trying to process what they had witnessed. Liam, who had arrived there feeling small and vulnerable, was now at the center of a transformation, not just within himself, but in everyone around him. Margaret, realizing that the moment was ripe for more than just words, made a decision. She raised her hand, silencing the murmurs around her, and spoke with an authority that made every word heard with absolute clarity. True wealth is not in possessions or status. It's in the impact we leave on others, in the good we do. Tonight should have been a celebration, but it has turned into a mirror of the flaws that still exist among us. She paused, allowing her words to settle in the minds of everyone present. I have built my life and my fortune on the idea that everyone, regardless of their origins or conditions, deserves respect and dignity. My grandson, Liam, is a living example of this. He is strong, not because of me, but because of his own struggle, his own ability to overcome the challenges life has imposed on him. Margaret's words struck deep in every heart present. Evelyn, with tearful eyes, realized how far she had strayed from those values, consumed by an insatiable desire to maintain her social position at any cost. Nathaniel, beside her, lowered his head, realizing how small he had become in the face of that woman who, without raising her voice, had exposed all his weaknesses. Margaret didn't stop there. She turned to Liam and Michael, her eyes shining with renewed determination. It's time for us to do more than just talk. Let's act. Liam, I want you, along with your father, to lead a new project. A project dedicated to supporting young people with disabilities, young people who, like you, often face a world that doesn't understand them, that doesn't respect them. Let's create something that changes the lives of many people, something that shows that everyone has value, that everyone deserves a chance. Liam, surprised but deeply touched, felt a wave of emotions take over him. The project his grandmother was talking about wasn't just an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of other young people, but also a way for him to transform the pain and humiliation he had felt into something positive, something that could help heal the wounds of many others. Michael, hearing his mother's words, felt that a new path was opening up before them. He had spent years trying to create an independent life, far from Margaret's influence, but now he realized that he could do much more alongside her, using his strength to create something truly meaningful. Mom, we're in this together, he said, his voice filled with new conviction. Let's make this project a reality. Let's change lives. Margaret nodded with a slight smile on her lips. She knew that this was the beginning of something grand, something that transcended the power and money that many there so valued. It was about humanity, about creating a legacy that would endure, not in bank accounts, but in the hearts and minds of the people who would be touched by that project. The guests, who had until then observed in silence, began to realize the depth of what was happening. Many, inspired by Liam's courage and Margaret's vision, felt compelled to participate, to offer their support. The atmosphere of disdain and exclusion that had permeated the hall was slowly being replaced by a sense of hope, of purpose. However, at that moment, none of that mattered to Liam. He had found something much more valuable than the respect of those people or the prestige of being at a luxurious event. He had found his voice, his strength, and the certainty that, regardless of what happened from then on, he would have the support of his grandmother, of his father, and the ability to turn his pain into something that made a difference. As the night drew to a close and people began to disperse, the hall still carried the weight of what had happened. For Liam, that night marked the beginning of a new journey, a journey of overcoming, justice, and, above all, humanity. And with his grandmother by his side, He knew that no matter how many obstacles arose, he was ready to face them.